Young fighters were mocking the old janitor's limp. They laughed and said, "Grandpa, this isn't a nursing home," and took his equipment away. But after Marcus pushed him down, as the old man got up, the young fighter who spotted the faded tattoo on his arm suddenly backed away. Welcome to this powerful story of respect, courage, and forgotten legends. Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're from and how old you are. And if you believe stories like this need to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us ensure they are. Elite Fitness Gym opened every morning at 6, but the old janitor was always there at 5:45. Nobody knew his name. When signing the register, he only wrote his last name, Hayes. No first name, no past. No one had ever asked where he came from, and no one would dare to ask, because there was something in Hayes's eyes that most people had never seen, a depth, a weight, as if he carried untold stories from years gone by. Every morning, he repeated the same routine. Faded blue coveralls, white t-shirt with sleeves rolled up, and a baseball cap that was once navy blue, but had now faded to gray. No patches, no slogans, no markings, just simplicity, just invisibility. But the real story was in the way he moved. Most people saw him as just an old janitor, someone getting by on retirement benefits, with too much time on his hands. But careful observers noticed different things. The way he moved, how he controlled his surroundings, and most importantly, despite his age, there was something very different about his body. When he bent down, his knees didn't creak, his hands didn't shake. When lifting heavy equipment, his grip was like someone whose strength hadn't softened over decades, as if his body had been through a different kind of training. But nobody questioned these things. Hayes was too quiet, too invisible, and perhaps that was intentional. Because some people prefer silence, especially when their past contains things that shouldn't be spoken about. That morning, Elite Fitness was busier than usual. A group of young MMA fighters had come in before training, and the gym was filled with their energy. Among them were jokes, ego competitions, and that boldness that comes with youth. Hayes was quietly doing his job as always, carefully folding his cleaning cloth. But this time, the young fighters began to pay attention to him. At first, it was just sideways glances, smiles, then whispers, then loud comments. One of them looked at Hayes, exaggeratedly mimicking his limp, and said, "Look at that old man. This isn't a nursing home, Uncle." The others laughed. Hayes said nothing. He just continued folding his cloth. But at that moment, the energy in the gym began to change. Marcus, the leader of the group and a large fighter, approached Hayes. There was a mean glint in his eyes. He wanted to assert dominance over someone that day, and Hayes seemed like the perfect target. Marcus walked up to Hayes, took the cleaning cloth from his hands and said, "Hey, Grandpa, drop that cloth and do your real job." Another fighter added, "Marcus is right. This place must be too tiring for you." Hayes still said nothing. He just tried to stand up. But Marcus pushed him from the shoulder. Hayes lost his balance and fell hard to the ground. At that moment, the gym went quiet. Just for a few seconds. But those few seconds were when everything began to change. Because as Hayes got up, his shirt sleeves lit up, and that faded tattoo became visible. At that instant, one of the young fighters who saw the tattoo suddenly backed away. His face had gone pale because he recognized that tattoo, and he knew what it meant. The young fighter whispered quietly, "Wait, but nobody heard him. Marcus was still savoring his victory. The others were still laughing, but something had changed. And this change would slowly reveal itself. Hayes got up. He didn't complain. He didn't show anger. He just collected his cleaning supplies and continued working, as if nothing had happened. But there was something in his eyes, a spark, as if his expression was saying, "You don't know who I am yet." Marcus hadn't noticed this detail. He just turned to his friends with a proud smile. He had just humiliated an old man, and he was enjoying it. But the atmosphere in the gym had begun to change, because the young fighter who saw that tattoo, Tommy, was now watching Hayes with completely different eyes. That tattoo wasn't an ordinary tattoo. That tattoo was Special Forces, and the kind that only those who had been in certain operations carried. Tommy's father was also military, and Tommy had recognized those markings. But he wanted to be sure, because if he was right, Marcus had made a very big mistake. Over the next few days, Tommy carefully watched Hayes. His way of moving, his posture, how he controlled his surroundings. And the more he watched, the more certain he became. Hayes wasn't an ordinary janitor. His way of moving was too disciplined, too controlled, and most importantly, he was constantly scanning his surroundings, as if he was always looking for danger. These were behaviors of a retired soldier, and habits developed only by those who had been in special operations. But Tommy wanted to be sure, so he decided to approach Hayes. That day, Hayes was cleaning equipment in the back section of the gym. Tommy slowly approached. His heart was beating fast, because if he was wrong, he would be in a very awkward situation. Tommy approached Hayes nervously and said, "Excuse me." Hayes turned. His eyes assessed Tommy, like making a threat evaluation. Hayes replied calmly, "Yes, son?" Tommy stammered, I saw that tattoo on your arm." Hayes' face didn't change, but something flashed in his eyes. Hayes asked, "Which tattoo?" Tommy swallowed nervously and said, "Special Forces insignia, 75th Ranger Regiment." At that moment, everything stopped, as if time had frozen. Hayes looked Tommy up and down for a long time. And then, very slowly, nodded his head. Hayes said quietly, "Once upon a time." Those 4 words changed everything. Once upon a time. Tommy's heart beat faster. So he was right. Hayes really was a former soldier. And not just any soldier. Special Forces. Tommy asked, "How long?" Hayes answered plainly, 22 years, 1985 to 2007. Tommy continued, "Which operations?" Hayes stopped. He looked away from Tommy, and there was a long silence. Hayes finally said, "The kind that aren't talked about." Tommy knew what that meant. Secret operations. Off-the-record missions. The kind of work the state doesn't officially recognize. Tommy asked, "Iraq? Afghanistan?" Hayes replied, "Other places too. Places you won't find on maps." At that moment, Tommy understood. Hayes wasn't just a former soldier. He was a legend. Someone who had performed silent heroics. And now he was here, cleaning at a gym. And Marcus had knocked him down. Tommy asked, "Does Marcus know these things?" A slight smile appeared on Hayes' face. He said, "Marcus doesn't know much." Tommy couldn't sleep that night. Hayes' words wouldn't leave his mind. Operations of the kind that aren't talked about. Places you won't find on maps. This man must have stories, incredible stories. But nobody was listening to them. Nobody was showing him respect, and Marcus had humiliated him. This needed to be fixed. The next morning, Tommy came to the gym early. He would wait for Hayes and ask him more questions, because he wanted to know the rest of this story. Hayes came at 5:45, as always. Tommy met him. Tommy greeted him. "Hello, Hayes." Hayes was surprised. He replied, "Good morning, Tommy." Tommy asked, "Can I talk to you?" Hayes stopped. He looked around. The gym was still empty. Hayes asked, "What do you want to talk about?" Tommy declared, "About who you really are." Hayes's face hardened. He said, "I'm just a janitor." Tommy replied firmly, "No, you're much more than that, and everyone needs to know this." Hayes said in a calm voice, "Tommy, some things should stay in the past." Tommy asked, "But why? Why don't you get respect? Why can Marcus treat you like this?" Hayes looked at Tommy for a long time and then said, "Because real power is in silence, son. You're more powerful when nobody knows." But Tommy wasn't convinced. This was wrong. Hayes should get respect, and Tommy was going to do something about it. That afternoon, Marcus and his group came to the gym again. Loud as always, arrogant as always. When they saw Hayes, they started mocking him. Marcus said, laughing, "Look, Grandpa's here again. Haven't you retired yet?" Another fighter added, "Maybe he has a mortgage." Tommy couldn't stand it anymore. He stood up and faced the group. Tommy said clearly, "Show him respect." Marcus was surprised. He asked, "What are you saying?" Tommy declared, "Show that man respect, because you don't know who he is." Marcus laughed and said, "What would he be? Former cleaning company boss?" Tommy announced, "No, he's a retired sergeant from the 75th Ranger Regiment. He served 22 years in special operations and in places you couldn't imagine." The gym went quiet. The smile on Marcus' face slowly disappeared. Marcus said, "You're joking." Tommy replied, "No, I saw the tattoo on his arm, and he confirmed it himself." At that moment, all eyes turned to Hayes. Hayes was calmly continuing his cleaning, but now everyone was watching him with different eyes. Marcus approached and asked, "Is this true?" Hayes stopped. He looked at Tommy, then turned to Marcus. Hayes said quietly, "Yes, it's true." That confirmation had a bomb effect in the gym. Hayes had said yes. Marcus froze. The other fighters, too. Nobody was speaking. Hayes continued, 75th Ranger Regiment, Bravo Company, 1985 to 2007. 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Silver Star. The silence deepened even more. Hayes added, Lebanon, Grenada, Panama, Gulf War, Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. Marcus's face turned white. He stammered, I didn't know." Hayes said calmly, "Of course you didn't know, because you didn't ask. You just judged." At that moment, Marcus realized what a big mistake he had made. He had knocked down a war hero. He had disrespected him. Marcus said almost in a whisper, "I'm sorry." Hayes looked at him for a long time, and then said, "Marcus, the most important lesson you'll learn in life is this. Don't judge people by their appearance, because you can never know the whole story." After that day, everything changed at Elite Fitness. Marcus not only apologized to Hayes, he began to show him respect. He said good morning every day. He offered to help him, and most importantly, he listened to his stories. Because Hayes had slowly begun to open up. Those silent walls were crumbling, and the stories that emerged were incredible. Stories of carrying wounded soldiers under enemy fire in Somalia, silently neutralizing targets in night operations in Iraq, rescuing lost pilots in Afghanistan. Every story reminded them that Hayes wasn't just a janitor. He was a hero, a silent hero. And now everyone knew it. Other members of the gym also began talking about Hayes. As they learned about this past, their respect increased. They no longer ignored him. They now talked to him. Hayes was changing too. He was becoming more open, more genuine, as if he was finally setting down the burden he had carried for years. A few weeks later, the gym management made a special decision. They would organize a small ceremony in Hayes' honor. That day, the gym was packed. Not just members, but other veterans from the city had come, because Hayes' story had spread. During the ceremony, the gym owner stood up and spoke. The gym owner said, "Today, we honor a special man here, a man who served our country for 22 years, saved countless lives, and never bragged about it. Sergeant Hayes, please come forward." Hayes was reluctant at first, but Tommy and Marcus convinced him. He slowly walked forward. The gym owner continued, "Hayes, it's because of people like you that this country is safe, and it's an honor for us to have you here." At that moment, the gym gave a standing ovation. A long, heartfelt applause. Hayes' eyes filled with tears. Because for the first time in many years, he truly felt seen. Marcus also stepped forward and said, "Hayes, I apologize to you. And without people like you, people like us wouldn't be here." Hayes looked at him and smiled. Hayes replied, "Marcus, you're a good kid. You just needed to learn." After that day, Hayes spoke privately with Tommy. Hayes said, "Thank you, son, but you didn't need to do these things." Tommy replied, "I did, because everyone needed to know who you are." Hayes nodded and said, "Tommy, learn this in life. The strongest people are the quietest ones, because they know they have nothing to prove." Tommy said, "But you should get respect." Hayes explained, "Respect is earned, son, not through your stories, but through your behavior. And by being here every day, quietly doing my job, I had already earned respect. There just wasn't anyone who noticed." Tommy understood. Hayes had been the same man for years. The same hero. People just weren't looking at him. Months later, Elite Fitness was a very different place. Members were more respectful to each other. Because Hayes' story had taught them something. Never judge anyone by their appearance. Hayes still came at 5:45 every morning. He still did cleaning. But he was no longer invisible. He now got respect. And Marcus? He was the person who changed the most. With the lessons he learned from Hayes, he became both a better fighter and a better person. Because real strength isn't in belittling others, but in being able to understand them. And Hayes? He always knew what his strength was. He just didn't feel the need to prove it to the world. Until the world noticed him. A year later, Hayes was approached by a local high school that wanted him to speak to their students about service and sacrifice. He was reluctant at first. Public speaking had never been his strength, and he worried about sharing too much of what should remain private. But Tommy and Marcus convinced him that his story needed to be told, not for his own recognition, but to help young people understand what real strength looked like. The speech Hayes gave was brief and understated. He talked about the importance of service, not just military service, but service to community, to family, to principles larger than oneself. He spoke about the difference between being strong and being tough, about the courage required to do the right thing when no one was watching. Hayes told the assembled students, "I didn't serve for the thanks or the recognition. I served because I believed in something bigger than myself. The real honor isn't in being thanked for that service. It's in living in a country where you can pursue your dreams, where you can disagree with each other, where you can sleep safely without wondering if you'll wake up tomorrow." He paused, looking out at the young faces watching him. Hayes continued, "Every day I see that freedom in action. In young people who challenge themselves to be better. In communities that come together to support each other. In the simple fact that we can gather here to talk about these things openly. That's what I fought for. That's what my brothers died for. And seeing it work, that's the only recognition I'll ever need." Now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Hayes? Someone living quietly, hiding their past, but actually having incredible stories. Maybe it's an elderly uncle living in your neighborhood. Maybe it's the employee at the local store. Maybe it's someone you never paid attention to. These people are everywhere. They're the ones who move a little slower because old wounds still ache from battles fought in forgotten places. They're the quiet ones who left everything behind to build new lives in freedom. They're the workers who arrive early and stay late because they understand that taking pride in your work is a form of service. These people don't demand recognition for their sacrifices. They simply go about their lives, doing their jobs, contributing to their communities, hoping for nothing more than basic respect. But here's what Marcus learned, what Tommy understood. When we take the time to really see these people, we discover that we're surrounded by greatness. We're living among heroes whose courage and sacrifice put our own concerns into perspective. Hayes didn't need a uniform or a medal to be a hero. He just needed someone to look past the surface and recognize the depth underneath. Someone to understand that strength isn't always loud, that the most important contributions are often the most invisible ones. Don't be like Marcus was in the beginning. Don't let ego blind you to the extraordinary people living ordinary lives around you. Be like Tommy, be like Marcus became. Be someone who looks deeper, who recognizes that everyone has a story worth knowing and dignity worth protecting. Share their names in the comments. Tell their stories, because they deserve to be remembered, just like Hayes. And if this story taught you something, subscribe to Silent Heroes, because we'll continue telling these stories. Stories of silent heroes, stories of forgotten legends. See you in the next video. And until then, look a little more carefully at the people around you, because you never know. Maybe you're standing next to a legend.